Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly. Our focus this week, what happened and why in Tuesday's elections in Kansas City, across Missouri and Kansas, and nationwide. We open our discussion with someone who has watched elections, midterm and general, from the highest levels of American politics. Bill Lacey served as President Ronald Reagan's political director in the White House and worked on several senatorial and presidential campaigns. Since 2004, Bill has been director of the Dole Institute of Politics on the KU campus in Lawrence. It is always a pleasure and a learning experience to visit with Bill Lacey. And Bill, welcome back to Ruckus. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Mike.
So Tuesday evening, were you thinking about the days gone by and kind of wishing you were back in Washington watching the returns come in the White House?
No, Mike. I was delighted to be sitting in my home in Olathe and watching on TV. It was a fun experience.
What do you think these elections said about the two parties in the United States, the Democrats and Republicans? Can we conclude Democrats are moving leftward and Republicans are moving to the right?
Well, I think you can conclude that, but I think the broader questions about each of the parties with Republicans is what do they do vis-a-vis their president? There's still a little bit of concern about his style, although I think most Republicans would score him pretty high on his substance. With the Democrats, the challenge they face, Mike, is, you know, who are they going to nominate to run against President Trump? Are they going to nominate somebody from the left? And what is that going to do? Or are they going to nominate somebody more from the center, but who's an establishment person who's quite a bit older? So it's going to be fascinating to watch the next 2 years.
And apparently there will be no shortage of people running for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Not at all.
So, some people are saying as many as 20.
Yeah, I would be surprised if there's 20, but then again, I mean, we saw almost 20 running for
17,
Republican.
in 2016.
And I can see it with some of the individuals that they're talking about, like Beto O'Rourke from Texas and others.
Well, you knew Ronald Reagan pretty well, worked for him for a number of years, worked in the White House. How do you think he would feel about politics in the United States if he were around today?
I frankly think he'd be fairly disappointed and borderline disgusted. I think Ronald Reagan was a man of great civility and even though he was very conservative, he was of moderate tone and moderate demeanor. He reached out to the other side. As Jim Baker said at the Dole Institute yesterday, Reagan used to always tell him, and I heard Reagan say this too, if you can get me 80% of what I want, why wouldn't I take that instead of getting nothing? And that would be Reagan's attitude.
I remember reading quotes from him saying, I'm not going to go over the cliff with the flag flying when I can get 50, 60, 70% of what I want.
It's exactly what Jim Baker quoted him as saying yesterday.
We now are going to have divided government in Washington. The White House is Republican, the U.S. House will be Democratic, the Senate Republican. We've seen divided government many times before. You've seen it when you were in Washington.
Divided government has worked in two very specific instances in recent history. One is with Reagan passing bipartisan tax cuts and budget cuts, and one with President Clinton passing welfare reform, achieving a balanced budget. Those things were done with bipartisan support. So perhaps, although the environment was different back then in those situations, perhaps we'll see more of that.
What do you think about the Kansas election? I know you don't deal a lot in state politics, but we're going to have a Democrat governor in January, a Republican legislature. Do you think there's going to be peace and compromise, or are we going to see battles continue?
I think that's very hard for me to assess. I think that on the one hand, you've got a significant block of moderate Republicans and Democrats who will be able to work together. Whether or not they're going to be able to do as much as the new governor would like to do is hard to say. So I think a lot depends upon the new governor's willingness, Governor-elect Kelly's willingness to go across the aisle and try to try to reach out and try to be a fairly centrist governor.
I suspect she'll do that.
I suspect she will,
just based on what little I know about her, but what I've read. Let's talk about the Dole Institute.
Sure.
It's a fine institution. It's in Lawrence, Kansas, easy to get to. What will people see when they go?
Well, they'll see a wonderful museum dedicated to Bob Dole's life. They'll be able to visit our public programming. We do probably 2 or 3 programs a week during the school year. And coming up on November 28th, they can join us to hear experts sitting around a table discussing the Kansas results. So if they're interested, if folks are interested in finding out more, check our website. It's November 28th in Lawrence at the Dole
You don't need
Institute.
reservations to attend these events.
You do not need reservations.
And if you just go over to take a look at the Institute, there's no charge for admission.
There is no charge for that or any of our programs, always free and open.
All right, Bill, as always, it's a great pleasure to talk with you. Thanks so much for coming in. Come back and see us.
We'd like to do that, Mike.
All right,
thank you.
sir. That is Bill Lacey, director of the Dole Institute in Lawrence. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Steve Rose is a Johnson County civic leader and a columnist with the Kansas City Star. Marianne Murray Simons is a freelance writer and consultant, and Woody Kozad is head of the Kozad Company, a government relations firm. One of our panelists had to cancel at the last minute, so can I count on you 3 to fill
Can we talk
maybe
twice as much?
30 minutes worth of time?
Good.
How much talk do you need?
Enough to fill through this program, so I'll depend on all 3 of you, and I
right.
feel relatively confident we'll have no
It
problems.
will not be a problem.
The 2018 midterm elections are over. The seemingly endless barrage of campaign commercials has ended, and the analysis of what happened has just begun, as we are set to demonstrate. We start with an overview. What did we learn about what Americans think and believe by looking across the country at the races for the House and Senate? What is your general sense, your overall impression of what happened at the polls on Tuesday? And we will start that discussion with Marianne.
We had fireworks in my neighborhood about 9 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday, and I think that was just a collective sigh of relief that it was finally over and we weren't going to see the horrendous advertisements that were running throughout the campaign. People were over it, but I will say that a huge wave of optimism, I think, came in the election. I think that was demonstrated clearly across the country. New people, new ideas, new opportunities to be able to improve our situation, and I am extremely optimistic about the future.
Well, we heard for months from Democrats and from some Republicans that a blue wave was coming. Democrats would take control of the House in a massive way and maybe even control of the Senate. And it turns out, Woody, there was not a blue wave, was there?
Well, I think when it finally sorts out the last few House races, the Democrats are going to have gained the number of seats that the long-term average, going clear back to John Quincy Adams, says you get in a first term of a president at the midterm election. So no, that doesn't make a blue wave. The Republicans may actually be picking up a couple of seats in the Senate. That's breaks with historic
And that's
norms.
rare, yes.
That's
that
very
rarely
rare.
happens. I think
on the
3
other hand,
times.
if you look at how many Democrats were running and therefore vulnerable versus how many Republicans, it's not quite as shocking as it might otherwise seem. To me, the big news out of the whole thing is, which was a question when he was elected, would the Trump coalition continue to hold together? At this point, it is holding together. And you're seeing, I think, a significant, not overwhelming, significant realignment within each of the 2 parties. In the case of the GOP, I think the message is it's not going to go back to being a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bush family and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
It's going to be less establishment,
Yes.
more Trumpist, and the Democrats, we're told, are turning more leftward.
Well, I would say this was a blue ripple. I think it would definitely move in the direction that I think Democrats may not be thrilled about, but they certainly are not unhappy. There are more Republicans who lost their races in the House than at any time since Watergate. So there was considerable movement within the House. In the Senate, of course, as you said, Woody, the statistics were such. There was so lopsided in the number of Senate seats that were open for Republicans versus Democrats. That's a really difficult one to call in terms of what it really means. But I give it, you got to give credit or whatever you want to call it to Trump, because the Senate did increase, very, very unusual. And there was not a blue wave. There was not a blue wave.
He said he was being voted on. He'd be on the ballot, and it is fair to say, I think, that he was not totally rejected.
I think that's a fair thing to say. It was not. It certainly was not a commanding result that you can say, you know, this says this about Trump or it says that about Trump. I think it was kind of a in-between result.
Except control of the House. I mean, control of the House going Democratic is a big deal.
But it can't do much by itself except investigate. It can't pass a law by itself.
And that's the $64 question for the country is there any chance that the people running the House and running the White House can actually conduct themselves for a while like grown-ups? That's the $64 question. I wouldn't bet on it.
Well, I wouldn't either. And both Trump and Nancy Pelosi said a couple of days ago, we want to work together for the mutual benefit of the country. We'll see what happens. The day after the election, President Trump held a lengthy news conference and got into a confrontation once again with Jim Acosta. Take a look.
If I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President,
that's
I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
All right, Steve, you're a longtime journalist. Who was at fault there? Was it Jim Acosta of CNN, President Trump, or both, or neither?
I would say that Acosta went over the line, and he did. I guess you would classify it somewhat as rude. However, taking press credentials away from a journalist is, I don't know if it's unprecedented. I don't recall it happening.
It's not
before.
unprecedented.
They've been suspended. I don't know if this is a permanent.
No, it's a suspension.
Well,
it was announced
for how long? You know, I don't know how long he's going to be, disallowed from participating. But I thought it was pretty extreme. Actually, if you want to know the truth, I think Trump kind of had it in his mind.
Absolutely.
Before Acosta even opened his mouth, I think he thought, this is a guy.
And would you say Acosta had it in his mind before he opened his mouth?
I think the president had an agenda that day, and his agenda was to bait and switch like he likes to do, related to what he knew was coming later in the day, which was firing Jeff Sessions.
As I might have expected, we're running way over time, even with just three of you, so let me move on. There were several major races of interest in Kansas this year. The state legislature was up for grabs. Two of the congressional races got a ton of attention in Metro Kansas City. But probably the most watched and talked about race was for Kansas governor. And trust me, no one watched and talked about it more than Steve Rose. So Steve, who's going to be sitting in the governor's office come January of 2019?
Well, I guess we know the answer to that is Laura Kelly. And I think it's not, I want to mention that there was a spread in that race of only 4 or 5 points. However, I don't think people realize that Chris Kobach, the Republican opponent, lost to Laura Kelly in Johnson County by 16 points.
His home county.
It was a wipeout, and it alone put her into the governor's seat. I don't think people realize Johnson County really carried the day for her.
How about the legislature? What will it be come January?
Interestingly, because of what happened going back into the primaries when a lot of moderate Republicans were knocked out and replaced by conservative Republicans, to make a long story short, we're going to have actually a more conservative legislature now than we did before, even though we've added some Democrats and so forth. Medicaid expansion is probably going to not pass. As you will recall, it passed once before and Governor Brownback vetoed it. with this particular configuration of legislators, and that's probably the single biggest topic or issue that they'll be facing, I would say it's not going to happen.
Marianne, there's not going to be peace at last in Topeka, where the moderate governor and the moderate legislature come together?
We've got a new governor who is very collaborative. And one of the messages that she sold during her campaign was, I know how to work across the line. I know how to accomplish things. I did that in the legislature, and I want to bring that to the state. And I believe her. I think that will happen. And I think that there are many on the Republican side who endorsed her moving into this campaign who understand that as well, because they've been able to benefit from her collaborative
Was that
nature.
a major benefit to her, having all these former Republican governors support her candidacy?
I don't think so, because I remember past elections where I remember a list of 100, former Republican moderates who were endorsing Democrats, and I don't think so. I just think that what made the difference. I think what made the difference is number one, Kobach was very much disliked, and I think that Donald Trump was very much disliked, and they both played into her hands.
Is Kobach about to become the next U.S. Attorney General? There's talk about that this morning and throughout the week.
From whom?
From the Kansas City, from the front page of the Kansas City Star.
Okay, well, I don't know. Look, I think, since we're talking about the Attorney General, I think that Trump, of course, wanted Sessions out of there, and cooler heads prevailed, probably including his own, until after the election. And then he buried the whole thing in the Acosta thing. It's beautiful the way he handled it. So Sessions is now gone. I think there's more than I want Sessions out of there. There's a message to Nancy Pelosi. You can investigate, and so can I.
Yeah.
So how much of this do you want? Because Sessions isn't running the AG's office anymore. Now, if he wants a real pit bull, then Kobach might just be his guy. I don't think that's likely to be it.
If he could be confirmed, then that might be a problem too.
Absolutely.
His history.
Well,
But the president said he wants to bring him into his administration. He said that in one of his political
Quickly talk about
rallies.
the 3rd District and the 2nd District of Kansas, both victories. Well, one a victory for Republicans, one a victory for Democrats.
Well, I think what we know is that if you'll recall, not that long ago, I think it was yesterday, the president named the Republicans who did not embrace him and who lost, and he named them by name. So, but what he forgot to mention are those that he embraced that lost. Kevin Yoder, he embraced, tweeted twice, embraced him, flew him on Air Force One to Kansas City, and Chris Kobach actually flew in and held a rally for him, and they both lost. So I don't think the President of the United States can claim that he is making or breaking.
But Yoder didn't embrace the president, did he?
Oh,
Not
I think
openly.
I think he did.
He didn't go to the event.
Well, Kevin Yoder never disavowed his alliance with Donald Trump. He certainly voted with Donald Trump, as his opponent pointed out. He was a Trump Republican.
Okay, final question. Let me
Yeah.
ask about the Johnson County Commission. There were 4 women running for 4 seats against 4 men. There was talk about old white men running Johnson County. What happened?
Well, it didn't turn out that we have 4 women in the county commission.
We might have one. Right?
We got one.
Becky Fast, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah,
And
replacing
Ed
Ron
Eilert is
Schaefer.
back as chairman.
Yes,
For the 21st time. And
Yes, and this is Ed Eilert's last time
Really?
to run for the chair. He's announced that.
Still like old white men in Johnson County.
And without term limits, let's say, without term limits, we do very well in Johnson County. Things happen, run very smoothly.
Well, let's go over across the state line. While there were various and sundry amendments and propositions on the lengthy Missouri ballot, national attention was focused on just one race, the contest pitting 2-term incumbent Senator Democrat Claire McCaskill against State Attorney General Republican Josh Hawley. Only one could head to or head back to the nation's capital. So, Woody, who won and who is headed to Washington?
Well, Josh Hawley, the Attorney General, is now the Senator-elect from the state of Missouri. He defeated Claire McModerate, It finally got caught out. Yes, she's a liberal Democrat, and he won by a significantly better margin than Blunt defeated Kander 2 years ago. So that, for him, that's a good sign.
And I think better than the polls had indicated.
Yes, yes. So while it wasn't some big sweep, the margin was a good margin in an off year when the president's in question, and he's below 50% personal approval rating for the president. Hawley pulled it off. Claire McCaskill is tough. She's smart. When you beat her, you've done something.
And Hawley has embraced the Trump agenda, I believe, and the president.
And so, but you understand, in Missouri, just to give you an example, 17 Senate seats are up, state Senate seats are up. In Missouri, one Republican who ran lost, and that was to an popular incumbent Democrat. Every other Republican, either there was no Republican filed, like an inner city seat, or they won. And there were a couple of them who were, one in Jefferson County, Senator Whelan, we were told he was in terrible danger. He won walking away. And it's a very union county. That's why they thought that. But that's where I say the Trump coalition.
Do you think the Kavanaugh vote or the justices' vote that she made cost her a lot of votes?
Yeah, and she tried to modify that vote, and say, here's why I'm voting against him. And that hurt her. In Missouri.
At the end of the campaign, she was talking about crazy Democrats in her radio commercials, and said she supported the president at the border with border security. Marianne, are you sorry to see Claire McCaskill leave the public scene, at least temporarily?
I am. I think she was an excellent representative in all of the roles that she served. And as she said in her concession speech, I've done pretty well in my campaign. I'm 22-2. And I'm not leaving. I may be leaving this particular seat, but I'm not going anywhere. So I think we have not heard the last of Claire McCaskill.
She's always wanted to be governor.
So and almost became governor.
She loves the state of Missouri and wants to continue to be involved.
We've got a bunch of things on the Missouri ballot that we can go through quickly. Woody, the so-called Clean Missouri Amendment, which dealt with redistricting, that was approved?
Yes, by a wide margin. They covered up what they were really interested in with a whole bunch of other stuff, some of which is unconstitutional. What they want, though, is the redistricting piece. And the guy who's going to do it will be picked by, guess who? The state auditor, the only Democratic state office.
Medical marijuana?
It happened just the way the guys in the Capitol building, I had no opinion on this. They said there are going to be 3 of them. Whichever one is first passes and the other 2 die, and that's exactly what it is.
Is this a prelude, do you think, to recreational marijuana?
I don't think so in Missouri. Look,
the stock market today on the stocks that had to do with marijuana are soaring with Jeff Sessions out of the picture.
Gas hike failed.
That failed.
You were very supportive of it,
yes,
as I recall.
I don't, but as somebody said to me, clearly the people of Missouri don't want highways. I mean, seriously, they passed the gas tax in 1921, didn't raise it till 1951, 1 penny. Didn't raise it again until 1987. And here we are, and it's 2018. We have the same gas tax as was the national average in 1985.
Part of it was the conservatives that came out to vote for Josh Hawley. However,
why do they hate highways so much?
Well, they don't want to spend. They don't want to increase taxes.
It was highways. They said it was for the highway patrol.
Okay.
Yeah, there was some dispute, at least on this program.
Yeah.
Some people were saying, but you read it and it says the money goes to the highway patrol, and I guess through the highway patrol.
Which gets the highway patrol snout out of the road trust fund, where it now is deeply planted and sucking up a lot of money that should be building highways.
So will they come back with something on
They got to come back with something. The roads are not in terrible condition, but if you want any expansion of the system at all, there's got to be a significant tax increase.
Well, somehow you all managed to talk enough that we're ready now for heading to the soapbox and roast and toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each, maybe a little more tonight, to charm, disarm, or alarm. And we start with Woody.
My toast is to Donald Trump on the subject of NAFTA. One of the reasons people were so worried about his saying, we're going to get rid of NAFTA, we're going to redo NAFTA, is that with the federal government, when you renegotiate a treaty, you're talking about a 5-year process. You have got to give this guy credit. He not only got it renegotiated. He did it in a matter of months, which is unheard of in Washington. We thought if he did this, we're going to be without a NAFTA agreement of any kind for several years, and it's going to alter everything. Instead, matter of months, the whole deal's renegotiated. It's an amazing performance.
Now the USMC, as he likes to say, United States, Mexico, Canada. See?
There was a blue wave, I want to say, in Kansas, and there are from Johnson County now there are 10 Democrats in the delegation of 25, which is I can remember when there were 0 to 1. But in that blue wave, some really, really good Republicans were knocked out. And I want to toast one, unfortunately, Melissa Rooker from Fairway, who is one of the outstanding leaders in the House and was the education really expert and was in the forefront of that cause, was knocked out of the race by a Democrat who I believe many people have never heard of, and I don't even know if he campaigned.
And no one can pronounce his name.
His last name is Zhu, I think. XU.
Less than a minute, Marianne.
Well, I want to toast you, Steve Rose, for raising profile not only in Johnson County, but on this program in particular, about the real important issues that were affecting us in the state of Kansas. And the fact that Mike continued to talk about it and the panels continued to talk about it, I think raised the profile and really made a difference in the election. So thank you for what you did. And I join you in toasting Melissa Rooker, Ron Schaefer, who lost his bid for the Johnson County Commission.
Gallagher and Lenexa.
Right, and Claire McCaskill, all who served this country well.
Not that we're out of time or anything, but Steve, do you want to thank me for all the exposure I gave you on Ruckus?
I want to thank you for your comments. That was very kind to you.
I guess not. That's Ruckus for this week. We are back next Thursday at 7. Now for the Ruckus and the crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching and good night.